Okay. Want to see the thing? No. No. Okay. The barrel is considered protected and does not become yain nesach or stam yenim. In fact, it's actually mutter even for drinking. So that's version number one of what happens. Ve'ikad amri, others learn Amar of Papa, that what are of Papa paskin ad habarza chamra asir, that until the place where this hole is, the wine is asur. So what is this saying? So it's saying essentially from where his finger is, obviously the wine that's in that little hole is asur, as we said before. But here he's saying also everything above it would also be asur, and presumably on the theory that if left without it, he would left without it without his finger there, all of that wine would come out. Wine that's beneath the hole obviously wouldn't come out. So therefore, according to this version, Rav Papa is being stricter. It seemed that it's a chumrah of sorts. It's technically true that minat stadin would not be a connection. Side by side is not a connection. How do we know that? Because if side by side was a connection, then the entire barrel should be asur, because if the main body of the barrel is considered connected halachically to the wine that's in the spigot, so then it's all one thing, and there should be no distinction between top and bottom. So it seems that in this version of Rav Papa, we're saying that even though technically speaking they're not fully connected, since at some level the wine above the level of the spigot would come out, so therefore that too is asur, but the remainder on the bottom is mutar. Amar of Yemar. So Rav Yemer says this that Rav Papa is paskening one way or another according to either version, Ketanai is really like a machlokes Tanayim. Why? Because we have a machlokes that says chavis. Now this is a Mishnah in Tvul Yom, or a Bryce in Tvul Yom, a Mishnah Tvul Yom. I'm sorry, that says as follows. It's talking about a case of it says chavis shenikba bein mipia bein mishuleha or bein mitzideha. That you have a barrel that gets a hole in it, whether from the top, from mipia, from its mouth, bein mishuleha, from the bottom, or bein mitzideha, or from the side. V'naga ba tvul yom, and a tvul yom touched it, tameya, it's tamei. So what are we talking about here? We're dealing, I believe, with wine that is truma. And a truma cannot be touched by a tvul yom. A tvul yom is a person who, if someone has to go to the mikvah midaraisa, then they had to be, in order to become tahar, so they go to the mikvah, but from the time they finish going to the mikvah till Herav Shemesh, when the sun sets, they're in this category of a Tvul Yom. And a Tvul Yom is not metame ordinary things, but it would be metame Truma and Kodesh. And so therefore it's talking about Truma here, that if there is this hole, and it's all considered one thing, if it were to be touched by a Tvul Yom, it would become Tameh. What's the rationale for each of these? So they're saying as follows, that from the top, the idea is that if you touch the wine at the top, that everything beneath the wine is what's bringing the wine to the top to be able to be touched. So therefore, if you touch it on the top, the entire thing becomes tameh. Similarly, if there's a hole on the bottom, that's even easier to understand, because if you weren't putting your finger there, the whole thing would come out. So it's all considered to be one category. And in this case, and this is the point that would be in the Machlokas Tanaim that disagrees with Rav Papa, is saying that even from the side, it's considered to be all combined in some fashion, and therefore it would become tameh. So the fact that it does, so essentially it's saying that you do have a lateral connection. It's not just because generally speaking, when a Tvul Yom touches Truma, it becomes tameh, but it can't be matame something else. So if you were to think of the spigot hole as being legally separate from the rest of the barrel, so it would not, the Tuma would not transmit, because first the Tvul Yom would make the little bit in the spigot tameh, but the rest would not become tameh. So from the fact that the Tanakama here says that it does become tameh, he's saying that he disagrees and says that it's all considered one discrete unit, and therefore he touches it even from the side, that you would have chibur from the tzadin. However, continues the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Mipia u'mishuleha tmeya." I agree with you that if you touch it from the top, because all of that wine is bringing it up to the top, it's tameh. And similarly, if you're touching it from the bottom, where it would all otherwise flow out, that it's tameh. Mitzideha tahara. I'm sorry. Mitzideha tahara mikan mikan. But if it's from the side, then from here and from there, it is tahar, meaning above the hole and beneath the hole. So another way of saying that it doesn't, if the Tvul Yom touches the hole that's in the side, the stuff that's in the side in that hole becomes tameh, but the rest doesn't, because the Tuma doesn't transfer. So again, the distinction here seems to be the question of, is it considered, are they considered one discrete unit, the hole and the rest of the barrel, or not? So the Tanakhama says it's all one thing, and therefore if you touch even from the side, it doesn't, it becomes tameh. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is, no, those are considered two separate, distinct units. The side, the spigot hole itself becomes, again, we're not necessarily dealing with a spigot, just the hole. The hole itself becomes tameh, but the remainder does not. So what do you see? You see that this halacha of Rav Papa is itself a machlokas. Now, it's a very interesting thing. Rashi twice mentions that essentially what happens. So who is Rav Papa holding like? When Rav Papa says the side is not connected to the main body, he's holding like Rabbi Yehuda, not like the Rabbanan. And so Rashi twice talks about this, that the halacha does not follow Rav Papa, because why? Because the Tanakama in the Mishnah there is the Rabbim, and Rabbi Yehuda is the Yachid. Yachid v'Rabbim, we always pass in like the Rabbim. So that's what Rashi says, and that's what you would expect. However, we see that some of the Rishonim, including the Rambam, paskins not like that. And so the question is, why not? Isn't the halacha Yachid v'Rabbim, halacha Krabim, which gets into a very interesting question of the following. If you have a Yachid v'Rabbim that seems clear, and that would be the psak, but yet you see an Amora, in this case being Rav Papa, who's paskining, so did he have some kind of Masorah that the halacha followed the Das Yachid in this case? So it's an interesting thing. So it's not always absolute that Yachid Rabbim, Halacha Karabim, but others, Rashi clearly seems to hold, Yachid Rabbim, Halacha Karabim, that the fact that Rav Papa says it, just the halacha is not like him, because he's paskening like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Papa, Ovid Kochavim Adon of Yisrael Akuba. So we're talking about as follows. They have a guy who is holding on to the barrel. He's holding the barrel, and he's pouring it out into a jug or something, a pitcher that a Jew is holding. So then, chamra asir. so then the wine that the guy is pouring out is aser. My time, what's the reason? Ki ka'asi mikoach ovid kochavim kasi. So we dealt with this a number of times over the last few days. The idea of koach, if something's coming out by the force of the ovid kochavim, by the force of the guy, then that is considered. It makes the wine aser. Yisrael Adana. So I'm sorry. So this actually, I should just say, it gets into very interesting sugya here. Rashi seems to say that it's aser even bahana. Although on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis in two places, Rashi seems to say that it only becomes when you have koach, when you have force of the nakri, it only becomes aser in drinking, in drinking, but it's not aser in hana. And it's a very interesting thing in the Rishonim how they learn. It seems that there are two versions of Rashi, and so what we have in our Gemara over here on Daf Samach seems to be from one version and a different version from Nun Ches Amud Beis. There are others who try to explain why Rashi actually distinguishes, and in that case where it's pouring, it would not be. It would only be aser b'shasiya, but here. But where that's where he's like being mozig, he's diluting. But here, where he's directly pouring the wine, it would be actually aser b'hana. Some understand just because the main form of nisuch that you would expect is that a guy would take wine and pour it as a libation to his Avoda Zara. And so in that case, on Nun Ches, we were talking about pouring water into wine. That's not the traditional method of service, but here the method of service is to pour the wine. So again, interesting thing whether we have two versions of Rashi, whether Rashi was being exact, some changed the lashon in Rashi, so all over the place. But in any event, it seems clearly it's aser at some level, where the Jew is only holding the pitcher and the ovid kochavim is the one who's holding the barrel. Yisrael Adana, but if it's the reverse, where the Jew is pouring the barrel, and the guy is just holding on to a pitcher, chamra shari, so then it's mutter, and generally speaking, we would understand this to say that it's mutter even for drinking. That you could go ahead and drink it, because really the guy he's not doing anything because he's just holding on to the pitcher. V'imit tzadid tzidudi, but, and this is again something the Mefarshim go all over the place about what this is. It means if he puts it on its side in some fashion, aser, it's aser. So some understand this to be that since we're talking about he filled the pitcher, and if the guy adjusts the pitcher at all, then he might touch the wine, and that's why we do it that way. Others understand that the issue is that by adjusting the pitcher, he's essentially being meshachshech, he's shaking. Now that's not the typical way of doing shikshuch, of shaking for purposes of Avoda Zara, but there's some notion that perhaps if he adjusts the pitcher that he's doing that. One of the more interesting things that Ravan says has a different understanding, which is that when it says mitzadei tzidudi, means that the Jew turns his face aside. So it's saying if he stops watching the guy carefully, so it's one thing. If the Jew is pouring the wine from the barrel into the pitcher and he's watching the guy to make sure he doesn't touch it, that's fine. But if he looks away for even a moment, maybe the guy's going to touch it and therefore it becomes us. There's a lot of different ways of understanding what this is. Amar of Papa says, Hi Ovekochavim Dedari Zika V'Ka'azil Yisrael Achure. So if you have an Ovekochavim who is carrying Zika, we've dealt with this before, it's some kind of pouch. We learned earlier in Avoda Zara, like to fold it over and sealed and whatever, but the basic idea is that he's carrying this pouch and there's a Jew right behind him. So then the Gemara says Papa says an interesting distinction. Malya, if the pouch is full of wine, right, then shari, the lamakarkesh, because essentially if something is full, you can't really shake it, right? And our shaking, you need space for it to shake. So therefore, if it's full, we're not concerned that he did any kind of shikshuch. And obviously, he didn't touch the wine directly because we're dealing with a closed pouch that he can't touch the wine. So the only question on hand is, could he have done a shikshuch? Could he have shaken it? And the answer is he can't because it's full. However, chasera, if this pouch is less than full, asir, because doma mekarkesh, because maybe he'll have shaken it. So in other words, therefore the point is, and again, this is different than the ordinary form of shaking. Ordinary form of shaking would be to stick your hand in and to shake around. But here he's doing it by shaking the entire pouch. But he's saying if you could shake the entire pouch and it's not full, and therefore the wine in it would shake around, that's considered perhaps a form of mekarkesh. Kuva, but what if he's carrying a pitcher of wine? So then the halacha is the opposite. Malya aser dilmanaga. So he's saying as follows: if a guy is walking around carrying a pitcher of wine, so if the wine goes all the way to the top, so we have to be concerned that in some fashion, maybe he's going to end up touching it because it comes right up to the top and the handle maybe is near the top, his thumb, whatever it is, will touch the wine. However, chasera, if it's empty, meaning if the pitcher isn't entirely full, then shari, then the wine in it is mutter delay naga, because he won't have touched it. So what about the fact that inevitably when he's walking with it, he's shaking? So why not say that it's shaking? So the answer is, the Mepharshim explained that since really he doesn't want it to shake. Why? Because he doesn't want to spill. So if therefore the fact that it shakes a little bit is not something that he wants, it's something he doesn't want, and that makes it a case of where it's touching it shelo b'kavana, without kavana, because he's not really trying to make it be agitated, and therefore it's not a problem of shaking and it's not a problem of touching, because the surface of the wine is beneath the top of the pitcher and it's not easy for him to be able to touch the wine. Okay. Rabashi disagrees and says, I agree with you, everything you said about the pitcher. However, as relates to the zika, that pouch, bein malya, bein chasera, shari. It doesn't matter whether it's full or empty. So we had made a distinction. We said if it's full, you can't shake it, and therefore it's permitted. But if it's only half full, then you could shake it, and therefore it would be asur. Rabashi says, no, I disagree. It doesn't matter whether it's full or partially empty. It's still permitted. My taima and ein derech nisach b'kach. Because that's not how people do nisach, as we referenced before. If it's in front of the Avoda Zara, they pour. If it's not in front of the Avoda Zara, they stick their hand in and they shake around. That's the way you do nisach. Taking a pouch and from the outside shaking it up, that doesn't constitute a case of, that's not a traditional manner of nisach, and therefore it would, according to Rashi, would be mutter even if it was half full and he shook it from the outside. Ma'atra Zara, so this is talking about a certain kind of press that they used to use to press the grapes, and the fundamental point has to do with so in its most complex form, you could have many layers, and this will become relevant in a minute. So if you have a basin where you put the grapes, so in its most complex form, what you could have is you'd have boards, and on top of the boards would be a beam of some sort that pushes down on the boards, and there's this kind of screw mechanism that you use to turn, and that pushes the beam down, which in turn pushes the boards down. And that screw is sometimes twisted by means of a pole or something that goes through the screw. So in this scenario, you have as many as 4 levels of what's happening. So he turns the pole, that turns the screw, that pushes down on the beam, that pushes down on the boards, and it crushes the thing. We'll see in a minute why that's relevant. But in any event, it's that form of thing. So Rav Papi Shari, Rav Papi says, if a non-Jew were to operate this press, the wine is not considered to be problematic. Rav Ashi v'tem Rav Shimi bar Ashi asar, but Rav Ashi, or some say Rav Shimi bar Ashi, says no, that's a problem if the guy operates this press. Why? So the Gemara says, "But kocho kuliyam malo pligi da asar." So where it would be a case where, let's say, it seems that kocho would be if the guy, let's say, stood on the boards that were pushing down on the grapes, that would be through his energy. It's not direct in the sense that he's crushing the grapes because he's standing on the boards, but it's his koach that is causing the grapes to be crushed. That would be us according to everyone. Ki pligi bekoach kocho. Where are we disagreeing? Where there's koach kocho, which is the idea that, for example, you have him moving the screw that's pushing down on the beam, that would be koch kocho, or actually if you have even the beam that's pushing down on the boards, that would be koch kocho, because it's 2 steps removed from his body. Okay, so that's one idea, that everyone agrees that if he has only one intervening implement, that it's aser, but if there's 2, that's where they have this machlokas. The others that say, everyone agrees that if you have 2 steps removed, then it's mutter, the shari, ki pligi. When do they argue? Bekocho, where it's just 1 step removed. So that seems to be a machlokas as to what the machlokas is exactly. Have a uvda bekoch kocho. There was a story where it was 2 steps removed. V'aser Rav Yaakov min Nahar Pekod, and Rav Yaakov of Nahar Pekod answered it. Now, if it was koch kochos, I don't know if this story supports the idea that they argue by koch kocho, because if everyone agrees koch kocho is mutter, then how did Rav Yaakov from Nahar Pekod do it? In any event, the very interesting thing has to do with, okay, when people say 2 steps removed, koch kocho, what about koch kocho, or 3, 4, 5, 10 steps removed? So it seems to be an interesting machlokes. Tosas seems to say that it doesn't matter. That as many things as you have intervening, at the end of the day, if it's a force of his koach, the Rashba and the Rosh and Rabbi Yerucham talk about Rashi's view, and they're less clear that Rashi agrees with Tosas. And then Rabbi Yerucham himself, I think the Rosh himself also say that they hold that there is a distinction. In fact, I think the Rabbi Yerucham holds that according to everyone, once you get to 4 steps removed, that it becomes mutter. So it seems to be a very interesting machlokes in the Rishonim. In general, is koch kocho exact, meaning 2 steps but more would be mutter, or it's a concept. Once he's the force behind what's happening here, would those Manda Amrim say it is aser? Okay, continues the Gemara, the last line on Samach. Hahu chavita the ifka lo arka. So there was this barrel of wine that split vertically, meaning Rashi explains it as that this side wants to fall this way and this side wants to fall that way. In other words, essentially, right down the middle, it splits, not horizontally, but the split is vertical. Okay, Idri Yahu Avikachav, and this guy jumped in Chavka, and he essentially hugged the 2 sides, so he was holding it together. Shari Rafram Ben Papa. Rafram Bar Papa permitted this wine. Now, it seems pretty clear that when he permitted it, it was only for sale, not for drinking, because at the end of the day, he was holding on to this barrel, and especially according to Rashi, who learns throughout the sugyas of the recent days, that if you're holding on to something when it's in there, it would seem to be like he's holding it directly. So therefore, when he permitted it, it was for sale. I'm sorry, that they allowed him to sell it to the kachavim. So it was aser b'shia with drinking, but not aser b'hana. V'hani mili de pakala arka. This is only when it splits vertically. Aval lepusye, but if it were to split horizontally, so you have the 2 parts of the thing, afilu b'shia shari, then you could even drink it. My taima ma'isa levena ka'avid. He is simply doing a ma'isa levena, which is he's not doing anything more than a brick would do. What does it mean? What would a brick help here? So you have these 2 parts of the barrel, and you put a weight on top. It holds the barrel together, and then the wine won't seep out where you have this horizontal seam. Now, this gets into an interesting question about, especially according to Rashi, who I referenced, that holds that even if you're touching something that's touching the wine, that is like touching it. So why is it okay? At the end of the day, he's holding on to this barrel, and that gets into a very important yesod. The Shach brings this in Yardea and talks about this in a number of instances with our sugya, which is when do you have that touching wine through the medium of something else makes it aser, is when you're bringing that. So if I'm holding on to to something, and I bring that to the wine. So the fact that there's the intervening thing between me and the wine doesn't matter, and you still make it usher. But if the wine is in touch with that thing already, so in this barrel, the wine is in touch with the barrel, and all I'm doing is coming and holding it, or not me, but the guy is coming and holding it together, top and bottom. So the fact that he's touching the barrel and the barrel's touching the wine doesn't matter, because he didn't bring the barrel to the wine. The wine was already touching the barrel when he came along, and he just held on to it. So that's a very important yesod in understanding these things. Okay. Hahu avekochavim dishtachach dahavekoi b'matzrasa, that you had this case where an avekochavim was found that he came to the press, and we're talking about where essentially the press had already been finished. They took the wine away, but it still had residue of liquid there. Ravashi i'ika tofeach lahatfiach, that if there is tofeach lahatfiach, I'll explain what that is in a second. Boy hadacha, it needs very careful cleaning. What is that cleaning? We'll actually see it, I think, in a couple of weeks. But it has to do with basically where you have to go through two levels of taking afar. You take ash of some sort, and you have to scrub it and then wash it off, and scrub it and wash it off. That's what you need to do. That's by hadacha is washing it. By nigov, nigov is what needs to have the ash. The ilo, if it's not tofeach lehatfiach, hadacha ba'al masagilo, it's enough to wash it. What's going on here? What's tofeach lehatfiach? Is the sugya comes up in Gittin. It's talking about if you, in the way you wash your hands for truma, if you wash part of the hand and the other part of the hand, that's the sugya there. But essentially, you see the idea that in that sugya that if you have something that is wet enough to moisten something else, that is not wet enough to be considered a chibur that can connect two liquids. When you have something that is wet enough to make something else wet, and that thing in turn can make a third thing wet, that's a sufficient level of liquid that it is considered a chibur and it can connect two liquids. So what does that mean? So if I touch something that's wet and my finger becomes wet, but by the time I touch the table's not going to become wet, that's not a chibur. But if it's wet enough that I touch it, it comes on my hand, and then my hand can make something else wet, then that is a chibur. So what's the difference? So what's going on here is the fact you had a press that had been used, and you have two kinds of liquid. There's liquid that still remains on the walls of the press, and you have liquid that's absorbed in the wood, or the wood, I think, of the press. So it's as follows. If the liquid that I touch that's on the surface of the wood is sufficiently wet to make something else wet, so it is a chibur, so then it connects the liquid residue that's in the barrel that you can see and feel with the liquid residue that's in the wood itself. And then therefore, you would have a problem, because now, the next time you use the press, the wine is going to come together with the wine that's absorbed in the wood, and it's going to be a problem because it was touched by a guy. So that's what we're saying is the halacha, that it depends. If the residue that's in there is enough to not only make something wet, but that thing in turn to make something else wet, then it passels the wine that's absorbed in the wood, and you need to do nigov, which is that particularly strong form of cleansing. If what happens is it's not tofech ketela tfiach, it's not wet enough to make something else wet, so then all you need to do is wash it, because we're not worried about the wine that's absorbed in the wood, because that did not have a chibur and did not become aser. So all you have to do is make sure that the initial wine that had been there, so the guy touches it, you have to come spray it out, but that's good enough because you're getting rid of the liquid that's there. Oh, I apologize. Thank you, Jeremy. I should say our sponsors, the annual Talmud Torah sponsors, the Tilson family, as it's chus for Besuros Tovos for Am Yisrael. The Talmud Torah sponsor, Stephen and Wendy Drazen, in honor of Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Stanley Rosenzweig Zal, and Eileen Rosenzweig. Week of Learning, David and Wendy Hefter, in honor of David Hefter's 54th Bar Mitzvah anniversary, Parshas Eikev. Also having Daniel Hefter and Orly Olbaum in Shul to celebrate their engagement. And a welcome to David's nephew, Isaac, his wife, Gitti, and their children, Yishai, Nama, and Oro, who are visiting from Israel. by Dr. Ed and Faith Wolf in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Dr. Wolf's father, Cyrus Wolf, Shalom ben Zvi Hirsch Zal, and by Nathan and Beth Adler in memory of their father, Ben Adler, Hachaver Baruch Mordechai ben Moreno Rav Nassan Zal. Sorry for not doing that at the beginning. Okay, continues. We're up to the Mishnah now. Ovid Kochavim shenimtza omed betzada bar shel yayin. So this is in a Jew's property. You found the guy who was standing beside his open pit of wine. Generally understood to be an open pit. Im yesh lo milva alav aser, ein lo milva alav mutter. If he has a debt that he has a loan out to the Jew, then he makes the wine aser. But he does not have a loan out to the Jew, then it's mutter. So what's going on here? There's a basic idea, which is we have a right to assume that a guy doesn't want to be caught doing something he's not supposed to be doing, right? So he's not supposed to touch the Jew's wine. So therefore, we would generally assume that he did not touch the wine and the wine remains permitted. And the fact that he was in the rough area of the wine is not a problem. However, if the Jew owes money to the guy, so then the guy is going to say he's less worried about messing with the wine. He might even do nisach on the wine, because if anyone catches him, he's just going to say, like, I'm planning to take this wine because the guy owes me money. So therefore, if he owes money, the guy feels less inhibited from doing nisuch on the wine, and therefore you have to be concerned that maybe he was minasech, that he used the wine for a forbidden libation. Okay, new topics. Nafal labar v'Allah. What happens as follows? A guy falls into a pit of wine. You have this bar of wine, and the guy literally falls in, and then you bring him up out of the wine. Madadai bakana. We talked previously about measuring wine with your hand or your foot or whatever, but here he took a stick and he stuck it in kind of like a dipstick in the oil from back when we used to do that. You stick it in and you pull it out. So basically you're using a stick to measure it. Or hitiz esatsira bikana, or he kind of knocks away a bug or a bee or something using a kana stick. So there's this wine, and the guy comes and knocks away the bug from the top of the wine using a stick. Or he kind of, sometimes when the wine starts to ferment, it starts to bubble. So he kind of taps down the bubbles by kind of popping the bubbles on the top. So in all of these cases, what do they have in common? That he either directly, in the case of someone who fell in the bar, touched the wine, or he indirectly touched it but with intention using a stick, or he did it in this, kind of tamping down the bubbles. In all of these cases, you could make an argument that, now obviously in every one of these cases, he touched the wine in some fashion, and therefore it's aser b'shisia, to drink, because it's tam yenam. But the question is, do we have to worry about yayin nesach? And the Mishnah says, b'chol elu hayamaisa. And every one of these scenarios happened at some point. V'amru yimacher, and they said it could be sold, so it did not become aser b'hana. What's the reason? So, so generally speaking, Rashi understands. It was shelo b'kavana. When the guy fell in, obviously he wasn't touching the wine on purpose. He fell in the pit, and they pulled him out of the pit. It wasn't there on purpose. When he was measuring it with a stick, his point was to measure. He wasn't trying to touch the wine. He was trying to measure, or he was flicking the bug, the same thing. And in the case of where he tamps down the bubbles, Rashi says, "Ein derech nisuch bekach u'muter ba'ana." That's not how. Even though he is like touching the wine directly, shichshuch, which is what we're concerned about, that he would shake it. That's not how you shake. You shake by putting your hand into the wine, not by just tamping down the bubbles. So in all of these cases, we say that they considered it mutter for sale. Rabbi Shimon mater. In all these cases, Rabbi Shimon says you could even drink it. Where does Rabbi Shimon come from with this? So the basic idea, this goes back to something we discussed yesterday, which is, what was the Iker Gezerah of when they wanted to say that you should not have the wine of a guy when we're talking about stam yenam, because in all of these cases we're not worried about nisuch because he didn't touch it. He didn't touch it in a way that he would have done nisuch. So what are we worried about? We're worried about stam yenam, the idea that a guy touched it. So the question is, what was the fundamental takana? So according to the view that the fundamental takana was that we don't want him to come into any contact with any wine that was touched by a guy. So it doesn't matter whether it's the Jew's wine or the guy's wine, that we have a gzera. But if you understand that the primary point of the gzera was because of chasnus, you don't want someone to be socially close or intimate with Goyim, so don't drink their wine. The fact that they subsequently extended it to a case where a Jew had wine and was touched by a guy, that's not the main gezerah. So Reb Shimon would say that if that's what we're dealing with, if it's very clear to us that he had no intention and no possibility that he could have done nisoch, so he's willing to say that that's not the main gezerah, and therefore it would become mutter. Okay, continues the Mishnah. Natal as a chavis v'zarka b'chamaso. If a guy took a barrel and he threw it because he was very angry, and he threw it into a lebar, and he threw it into a pit that had wine, zehaya maisa, there was such a maisa v'echshiro, they said it was kosher. Why? Because we're gonna address this in the Gemara, but it seems he threw it, and we're not going to be concerned. So generally speaking, at least the way Rashi understood, kocho could be a problem generally because it's his force that caused it to hit. But here we're not going to be concerned that he in any way had intention to be doing something wrong like shichshuch or something like that, because the reason he threw the barrel is because he was angry. Nothing to do with trying to do anything with the wine itself. So therefore, we would say that it could remain kosher. Now, it's an interesting thing. Seems to be machlokes in the Rishonim as to the cases here where the Gemara says that he knocks away the bug with the stick, or he measures with a stick. So we would see that many people are medayik that's dafka with a stick. But if he were to do it with his hand, it would be a problem. But Tosas back on Nun Zayin Amud Aleph talks about the fact that Top Tosas brings this Mishnah, and he says it would seem to imply that if he did it with his hand, it would be aser. And Tosas says V'yeshlam the masnisin hu adin de biyad shari bahana, that no, even if he would flick the bug away with his hand, or he would measure with his hand, the fact that we learned that he used a stick, so he's saying the Tanakama's view would be the same if he flicked the bug or he measured, even if he touched it with his hand, that would be okay. It's usher in drinking, but it's not usher bahana. So why did it say with a stick then? Why not say with a hand? Because Reb Shimon, who says that it's mutter even for drinking, would only say that if you did it with a stick. If you did it with your hand, Reb Shimon wouldn't say it. So according to Tosas, it was just setting up the case for Rabbi Shimon. But the Tanakama himself, it's not clear, and he would say that even if he did it with his hand, so if he flicked the bug with his hand, that would seem to be okay. Okay, says the Gemara, Amar Shmuel. So we discussed this case that if you found the guy next to the open pit of wine, we said it depends. Does he owe the guy money? In which case the guy is confident touching it, or if he doesn't, then we say the guy is going to be afraid to touch it, and therefore it's not a problem. So Shmuel qualifies this ruling. Amar Shmuel v'hu sheyesh lo milva also yayin. When do we think that the guy will be comfortable touching the wine and maybe doing a nisuch because he's not afraid that he's going to get caught? Only if he has a security interest in that very wine. The fact that a guy owes him money in general is not enough to give him the comfort to go touch the guy's wine, because they'll still say, okay, I owe you money, but who told you you could touch my wine? So therefore, we're not worried that he touched it. But if he had a security interest in that wine, the guy's very comfortable saying, this is essentially my wine, and therefore he has a good excuse, and we have to be worried that he did a nisuch. Rashi says, Masnisin nami deka. Our Mishnah, he refers to it as our Mishnah. It's actually the Mishnah we're going to see on tomorrow's daf, but in the Mishnah's times, those are all part of one Mishnah. He says Tisnan, because we learn, you got a preview of tomorrow. That what happened? What does it mean that he was matahar the yayin of Ava Kochavim? Means a guy hired a Jew and said, take my grapes, make wine, but you should do it, not me, because I want it to be kosher wine so that we'll be able to sell it to Jews, right? And the basic arrangement was, he said, okay, we're going to make it, but you have to keep it by me till you sell it. When you sell it, that way I'll get my money. So he's essentially saying, I'm holding on to the wine till you actually sell it, but I'm not touching it because I want you to be able to sell it to Jews. V'nosno b'reshus, so he puts it in the reshus of the guy. V'halo, the guy, kosev lo, his kabalti mimcha mo'os. He said to him, he gave him a receipt saying, I already got the money from you, even though he didn't. So essentially, what was he doing? Why did he do that? He was converting it from a kind of security interest in this wine, because when he was saying, keep the wine here and I'm not letting you take the wine until you have a buyer and then you're going to give me the money, so he was clearly keeping a security interest in that wine. When he issued the guy a receipt and said, yeah, you paid for the wine already, it was not to forgive the debt, it's just to say it's not tied to this wine, it converts it to a general obligation of the guy. So then, mutter. Then in that case, it's mutter. But if the Jew wants to take the wine away and the guy isn't going to allow him to do it until he gives him the money, so that case, this was a story in Beishan, and they answered it. So that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah is basically saying, if the guy essentially released the specific security interest and made it a general obligation, so then there's no security interest specifically in the wine, and therefore it's okay that he leaves the wine by the guy. And Rashi clarifies, obviously he has to put a chosem, some kind of stamp or a seal on it, because otherwise, if you leave it by the guy and it's open, that would be a problem. We dealt with that, a month or so ago. But basically, as long as he doesn't have a security interest in it, it's us, or it's mutter. Tuma, Tuma the ein manicho. So what's the reason that in Beishan they made it aser? Is because the guy wasn't letting him take it out. So obviously he was asserting an interest in the wine. And if he's asserting an interest in the wine, even if it has a seal or a stamp, we have to be worried that the guy went ahead and did something with it anyway. But the implication would be hamanicho, but if the guy would allow him to take it out, meaning he's not asserting a security interest specifically in the wine, shari, it would be mutter. So therefore, shema mina, we should learn from this. Milval also yayin, but that in order to say that it's aser, it needs to be a specific security interest. But if it's just a general obligation, it would be mutter shema mina. We in fact learn from there. Very interestingly, Rashi seems to learn, which makes a certain amount of sense, that we see this from the Reisha. The Reisha says if he writes him a thing that converts it from a specific security interest to a general obligation, then it's okay. But the Gemara seems to be learning from the Seifa, because the Gemara is saying, if he let him do it, then yes. If he didn't let him do it, then no. It seems the Gemara is learning from the Seifa. And other Rishonim learn that it's the Seifa, so it's something the Mefarshim talk about, and some understand that it's all one case. He's saying, you have to get to the Seifa, because he's saying, even if, this is not like Rashi, but he's saying, even if the guy wrote that thing saying, I'm not making it a general obligation instead of a thing, if at the end of the day he still didn't let him remove it, then we're going to say it's a problem. So again, different understandings of the Gemara based on whether you understand this coming, each of them has a challenge, because l'chara, the Reisha should be enough, but yet the Gemara seems to make the diuk, makes the implication in the Seifa. And so that's something we should deal with. Okay, fine. So now we're back to those cases of where the person had this contact with the wine, but it wasn't intentional. So nafal labarva Allah, he fell into a pit of wine and he came up. Amr of Papa says, Lo shanu ela sha'ala mace. That if he came up dead, basically he died in there. Now some of the Rishonim discussed that even if he passed out, it would be okay, because as we're going to discuss, the question is, did he do something on his way out that would have made it into Yain Nesach? So okay, so it's only if he's dead or immobile. Aval olachai, but if he came up alive, aser. He'll be aser. My time. What's the reason? I'm Papa the dami alei kiyom edam. Because just like if you go way back to the beginning of Avoda Zara, we talked about this fact that on the holidays of the Goyim, they would give gratitude to they were in the mood of giving gratitude to their gods, and then therefore you have to worry that they did it using some form of nisuch. So the Gemara is saying, if on their holidays they're in a good mood and that's enough to say it, then for sure where his life just got saved, he fell into the wine and he was drowning, and so then he's going to do that. It's interesting. The Rishonim asked. The Rashba discusses this, that yesterday we learned that when the guy reached down and took the esrog, he grabbed the esrog. So we end up having to pour it off. We have to hold his hand immobile because on the way out he's going to do it. So why do we have to worry that he's going to? Why do we have to talk about the Yom Edom, the holidays? Why not just say, because he's gonna on his way out, he's no longer preoccupied. He's no longer preoccupied because he's already being saved. And the Rashba is saying it doesn't quite work that way. When a guy just almost drowned, he doesn't have the presence of mind generally to say, "Oh, while I'm here, let me do some shikshuch." But if he has gratitude and he's feeling like, "Wow, I'm being saved right now. My God did this for me," and therefore he's going. That's why I have to bring the reason of Yom Edom, that it's similar to the time when he had a holiday. Okay, continues the Gemara. Madadai bekana, that, or he measured it with a stick. Kol ela hayamaisa. All of these happened. V'amru yimacher, and they said that it should be sold, meaning that it's aser b'shasiya, but not with hanav. Rabbi Shimon matar. Rabbi Shimon said you could even drink it. So Amar Avoda barava. Avoda barava says yunuchu Rabbi Shimon brachos al roisho. Bless Rabbi Shimon. He should have blessings on his head. Kishu matir. Afilu b'shasiya. Whenever he says something is mutter, it's totally mutter. And kushu oser, when he asks for something, oser afilu b'ana. He's saying like basically bless him because his opinions are easy to know. Everything we tumble, and especially in the Rishonim, is it drinking? Is it hana? Is it totally mutter? What's the isser? He says Reb Shimon makes it easy. He's an absolute guy. Either it's entirely mutter or it's aser. So different Mefarshim explain what cases are they talking about. So one of the cases has to do with the fact when a guy treads directly on the grapes. Do you say that maybe that's a case that it would, even according to people who are mater, it is only mater b'ana, but not with shasiya? He says no, that's the case that Rabbi Shimon, when he's mater entirely. The idea that he asers entirely. Some understand that to be the case we dealt with of where the guy sucks on a straw. So he's trying to say that we dealt with the whole opinion of Rabbi there. He's saying that Rabbi Shimon would hold that that's aser even b'hana. So when he asers entirely. There's different views about what this is going on. The Rishonim, the Ramban discusses why is Rabbi Shimon so absolute. When he asers, he says because he talks about the fact that Goyim are adukin benisuch. They're very attached to doing nisuch. And therefore we have to really worry. And so therefore, generally speaking, Rabbi Shimon is an absolute guy. He says if there's a problem, we have to really be concerned that they did nisuch, and that in general the whole thing is a big chumrah. So therefore, Rabbi Shimon is very machmer in something that's a chumrah. The Chassam Sofer says that in terms of being mater, why is he mater? Because if at the end of the day the concern is chasnos, then why should you aser hana? And so he brings other reasons also. But in any event, they essentially praise Rabbi Shimon and say his view is very easy because he deals in absolutes. Okay, Amar Rav Chia Brei the Abba Bar Nachmeni Amar Rav Chisda Amar Rav. So Rav Chia Brei the Abba Bar Nachmeni says the name of Rav Chisda, says the name of Rav. Amri Lam Rav Chisda Amar Zeiri, and others say that Rav Chisda said the name of Zeiri. Halacha Reb Shimon. The halacha follows Rabbi Shimon that if you have no concerns that he did nisuch because the nature of his touching was not one that would have led him to that, then he could do it even to drink. There are those that said Amar Rav Chisda Amar Li Abba Bar Chanan Hachi Amar Zeiri. So it's a similar thing, but just saying that Abba Bar Chanan told him that Zeiri said halacha Reb Shimon. And so he passes like Rabbi Shimon, but concludes the Gemara, Vein halacha Rabbi Shimon, but l'maisa that's not how we paskin. Okay, says the Gemara, Nato Chavis. The Mishnah said, Nato Chavis is darka b'charmosa lebar zehaya ma'isa ve'chshiro. So again, the guy took a barrel of wine, he picked it up, he threw it into the pit. So the question is, they said since it was done in anger, they're not going to consider that to be a case of him. Again, the question would be, seem to be kocho, that he's throwing it. Rabashi. So Rabashi says a halacha as follows, which we're going to ask on from our Mishnah. Kol shebezav tamei ba'ovet kochavim ose yayin nesach. Kol shebezav tahar ba'ovet kochavim eino ose yayin nesach. So what's he saying as follows? So zav is a person, a man who has some kind of emission that puts him into the category of a zav. And Rashi makes clear that their laws are not exactly parallel, because by a zav there's such a thing called hesed, which is if you move something with indirectly, that halacha doesn't apply. But basically the way Rashi understands it is the Gemara is trying to set up a comparison between a zav and a guy touching wine. So if it's something that if the zav were to do it, it would make the thing that the zav touches into would make it tamei, then similarly if a guy does that to wine, it would make it into yayin nesach. But conversely, if a zav doing that would not make something tamei, then a guy doing the same thing to wine would not make it tamei. So it's setting up a parallel here. What's the point of the parallel? Is because a zav that throws something against something else does not make it tamei. So by Rav Ashi's formulation here, so therefore, if a guy were to throw something at something else, just like by it doesn't make a zav can't make something tamei that way, so too a guy can't make it into yayin nesach. So says the Gemara, Eisvei Rav Huna Rav Ashi. Rav Huna asked Rav Ashi, wait a second, look at our Mishnah. Natal zachavis v'zarka b'chamasa labar zeha yamayis b'beishan ve'chshiroi. And so that's our case where he threw it. So we're talking about a case where he threw, and there was this story in Beishan, and they were mashur it. B'chamasai in, when he was angry, we're willing to say he didn't have in mind to do anything like nisoch or shechshoch or for his koch to affect anything. So therefore it's okay. Shelo b'chamasa lo. But if he wouldn't have been angry, it would have been a problem. So what do we see? That when someone throws the barrel into the pit, if he's not angry, it's a problem. And you just finished saying zav and a guy are comparable, and we know that a zav throwing something doesn't make it tamei. So why should the guy make it tamei when a case where he's not angry? So the Gemara answers, Hasam de ka'azo minei minei. When in our Mishnah that we said that if he's not angry it would be a problem, is where Rashi just says shaholoch mizgalgal akli kol shah. He's basically saying, what happened? This wasn't really a case of throwing. He kind of rolled the barrel very close to the wine. And this is where you need Tosas to understand Rashi. Tosas understands that Rashi is saying at some point, at some point he released it right before the barrel hit the wine. Why does Tosas have to learn that way in Rashi? Why does Rashi have to say that? Because, as we mentioned before a number of times, Rashi's of the opinion that if you're holding on to something and with that something you touch wine, then you make it usher. So if he was holding on to the barrel, if it means he literally rolled it and was holding on to the barrel the whole time, so then at the end when he touched it, that would be a for sure problem. So herefore he sets it up that Rashi means he's rolling it, and then right before the end he releases it, but we still say it's no good if he's not angry because maybe he touched it. But if he was angry and he did the same thing, then we're not so much worried because he won't have done it in that way with that intention. Tosas understands that it could literally mean that he was still holding on to it when it went. So then because he could be touching it then, or so we have to ask ourselves, was he angry? If he was angry, he wasn't at all focused on doing nisuch. If he was not angry, he might have been focused. However, if it's literally a case of throwing it, he stood far away and threw it, that would be different, and in fact, that would, generally speaking, not be a problem. The Tosas and others talk about why and exactly how Rashi makes that distinction, and there's interesting discussion for those who are interested. Tomorrow you'll see when we finish this sugya on Amud Beis, there's something called Maskana de Milsa. Rashi kind of walks through all the halachas And many people, Tosfos talks about this in yesterday's daf, but many people see in that explanation exactly how to understand Rashi's view on throwing. Have a wonderful day.